Okay, we'll keep things moving here. We've got PE investing in Latin America with Cato Felan, a managing partner at La Hoja Capital Partners, and also Jonathan Lowe, a VP of Finance at Eisner Amper. Maybe we'll start with you, Cato. Give us the lay of the land, and how should we think about, PE investing in Latin America?
Well, I think that with the new administration we have in, the dollar is extremely strong all over Latin America. Your dollar buys, 25 to 30% more than it did 3 months ago, 6 months ago. And the opportunities for private equity in Latin America are not so much in the kind of private equity space we think here. They're really my kind of growth equity. Ticket sizes are smaller, company sizes are smaller, but the upside is bigger and quicker. You can do a small $25 million deal where you're aggregating veterinary clinics or self-storage and get 5x in about 4 or 5 years. And so the opportunity for Latin America right now is that we have a very strong dollar, and your dollar is buying a lot more, and there is risk assets to buy.
Great. Same question for you, Jonathan. When we talked earlier, you mentioned that Latin America is very, very similar to the environment that China was in 30 years ago as far as investing, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So just similar parallels from growing up. A lot of a lot of fractures of information and old school thinking, as well as family ties that drive a lot of the enterprises. So I've been running around Mexico for the last 3 years, multiple states, and just kind of observing the landscape. And it just reminds me of like Taiwan and Hong Kong when I was younger, with all the foreign direct investment coming in and really opportunities everywhere. That's the best way I could say it. It's really ridiculous.
And Cato, let's ask, what are the challenges that you see out there? Obviously, there's a great asymmetry of information, from U.S. investors regarding Mexico, Latin America. What are some of the challenges out there?
Well, one of the things that Jonathan just mentioned is there's a lot of family-owned businesses, and a lot of the records and books and records aren't up to snuff. They're not, GAAP certified. They're not, using the same types of accounting standards that we use here. And so it's really cleaning up a lot of those things to really get an essence of an understanding of the business as a whole. 98% of all incorporated businesses in Mexico are small and medium-sized businesses. And so, the challenge for private equity space, growth equity in that space, is really deciphering what is really going on with the numbers. It's a heavy cash society as well still, and accounting for that as you kind of build the books and understand the fundamental value of the companies that you're investing in. That's really one of the biggest challenges. And there's just so many. Mexico City alone is 23 million people. And there's just a lot of small businesses that are going on there, and trying to find where that next catalyst is to kind of take it to the next level. You got to sift through a whole lot of really basic information to get to that next level.
Jonathan, what are some of the challenges? You were based in Monterrey until very, very recently. What are some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, I spent most of my time in Chihuahua, but the challenges there, a lot of, not informal businesses, if you will, and having to deal with that. So what that means is not registered with the SAT. The SAT is like the IRS of Mexico. And so doing business, basically, I want to say of the population of the small and medium businesses, 25% might be falling within this category. And so the challenge here is if you're doing a legitimate business there and you're trying to work with other vendors that happen to solve some of your problems, and they're not on paper legitimate, you can't get what's called a factorial, and that allows you to do your business write-off. So that becomes frustrating in terms of trying to be more profitable. Yeah,
there's a massive informal economy at every level. Not just at the kind of small and medium-sized business, at the large business level as well. There's a very large informal economy that you have to be aware of and really get to understand. And it just takes time and in the market locally to kind of get there because there is just that. And you just don't know, you can't see it on the surface.
What industries are the most attractive from a PE perspective?
I mean, if you look at it from a PE perspective, I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done in Latin America from an infrastructure perspective. And so, if you look at electricity, that's a huge need across the board. And there's not enough capital from the public side to deliver that. And there's been work to try to figure out on the private side to deliver that, to help get that next level. Right now, there is massive demand and production that's being held up along the border for nearshoring and bringing in products into the U.S. because there isn't enough infrastructure. There isn't enough electricity on the grid. There's enough water to support the overall infrastructure there. And so those are some of the areas that the multiples on any of these things are just so much lower than they are here in the U.S. I think the only area that you would have to be careful on a multiple for that would be fintech. But everything else, ag tech, mining, ed tech, anything that you want to look at, multiples are super low compared to where we are here in the U.S.
Jonathan, how do you see it?
I think as Kato had mentioned, along the border of nearshoring DC centers to allow other U.S.-based PE firms to do add-ons to support their domestic enterprises. You see a lot of opportunities to make the freight forwarders more efficient, and investment of Chinese firms trying to get into the area in order to kind of circumvent our tariffs in the future, basically.
What are some of the stigmas that you see out there?
Well, look, I think that I live in Mexico City now, and I've lived there since just April of this year, but I spent all my life here. And I like to tell people in Mexico that I spent 54 years in the United States of America, and I'm going to spend the next 54 in the United States of Mexico, because that's what it's called, it's the United States of Mexico. But I think the biggest stigma is just the fact that we are so aligned in Mexico specifically with the rest of the U.S. We're on the same time zones, we all go to the same schools, we have the same kind of culture around making money, and the culture around getting further ahead. And so I think that's just the biggest misnomer, that there are, everybody that went to school here went to school with somebody who was Mexican. That's just all there is to it. There's Mexicans everywhere. And so the reality is that by not partnering with our neighbors down south, we're missing out. We're missing out. I mean, look, there's plenty of opportunity in the U.S., and I think that over the next probably 2 to 4 years, it is risk on across the board. I'm going to diverge one thing. Somebody said here earlier about some of the regulation that's happening. I don't think there's going to be an SEC, SFTC, CFTC, EPA, FDA, any kind of regulation over the next 2 to 4 years. There just won't be. I think that the executive orders in the first 100 days are going to be wiping out any enforcement policy for any consumer regulatory agency. So what do you do in that type of environment? That's what we live in Mexico right now. It is wide open. It is wide open to do what you need to do, but beware. And so I think that's kind of the biggest thing, is the stigma that we are more alike than we are different, and that risk on is on.
Of course, we now have Trump 2.0 on the horizon, the possibility of 20% tariffs. How do you see this?
Look, I was at a conference yesterday where there was all the big players, the local Mexican financial institutions and the JP Morgans and BlackRocks and Franklin Templetons of the world. And the Mexican side, the Mexican economists, there's 3 things that they mentioned. They view that the policies going forward are protectionist, inflationary, and recessionary. So, we can all talk about it here, but if you start becoming, and people mentioned here that we're going to start bringing manufacturing back here to the U.S., are any of you going to do those jobs? I don't think anybody here is, and anybody that we know is going to do those jobs. So we have to kind of think about those things, what that actually means. Anytime we have protectionist policies anywhere in the world, we have a history of what that looks like. We also have a projection that there's going to be increased tax cuts and more spending. So, you have to look at those from an outside view and not just kind of seeing what's on in front of your plate. And so the reality is for us, for folks here in Mexico, is that, yeah, there is a possibility for tremendous tariffs that will stymie kind of the Mexican economy and the U.S. economy and drive prices higher for everybody here. So that's what it looks like on this side, that it's protectionist, it's inflationary, it's recessionary.
Jonathan?
I see it as with tariffs, it's going to push more Chinese investment. I do think it's going to bring the U.S. and Mexico or North America closer together. From my standpoint, it behoove us as U.S. or as Americans to look out for our partners down south as a way to create a buffer against potential issues elsewhere. The fastest growing demographic in the United States is Hispanics, and they are increasing on education, wages as well, and a lot of the GDP of Mexico is repatriation of cash that is being spent as it circles back to the United States. So I think in the long run, it's going to help all parties in North America.
Those remittances that he talks about are the largest contributor to the gross domestic product in Mexico. It is a massive, massive number of small dollar remittances every single day, and it's huge.
Now, we also had a new free trade deal under Trump 1.0. Do we see something like that again on the horizon?
I think that, well, since he did it, I think the consensus on our side is that if the only thing that would happen is that they would start redoing it or renegotiating every year, which would be a nightmare. But I think the other part is that, there'll be more dismantling of some of these things. We'll look at the Paris Accords, we'll look at TPP, we'll look at a lot of different areas and see where the U.S. can basically circle its wagons. It's kind of the trend.
Let's talk about some examples of some successes out there.
Well, I think the big success in Latin America has been fintech. I mean, it is an underbanked community, and you actually have some companies like Numundo and Rappi that have gone public, or Numundo got public. And so, the trend in Latin America is not a capital markets trend. I mean, the capital markets in Latin America have diminished over the last 10, 20 years, and I was at BlackRock for a number of years and listing ETFs all over Latin America, and we were kind of part of that diminution of that capital markets. In 10 years ago, there were 130 companies traded on the Mexican Stock Exchange. Now there's 120, and that's dwindling. It's more of a real exaggeration of what happens in the U.S., that companies stay private longer. They just stay private forever inside Mexico. And so really the trend is really kind of getting that back up to speed, and then also just huge M&A. I mean, there are great companies to buy, great companies to consolidate, and they're just looking for more capital to come in. The investment capital kind of dried up last year, but the Chinese have really filled that, and they're going to continue to put more money into Mexico and Latin America. It's a big bankhead for them.
Jonathan?
I was going to echo the fintech aspect that addresses that 25% basically unbanked small and medium business or enterprises that have given them access to credit and streamline the payment processing issues. Like Clip is a really big case. Clip is like Toast in the United States that allows you process on-the-spot transactions as well as the bank-to-bank transfers. And then I want to say, what was another one that, let me get back to you about that one. I lost it.
We were talking earlier about Miami as kind of a beachhead looking towards Latin America, but what's surprising to me is you also mentioned that Texas is actually huge.
Yeah, I mean, Texas and Mexico just have a huge relationship, and if you go to, Monterrey, it's more Texan than it is Mexican. It's just the way the culture is really permeated. You go to like the Texas Alumni Association or Texas A&M, they're all going to the games every weekend. It is very much a U.S. kind of suburb city. And so I think that those are the kinds of things that we'll continue to see, where there's more and more engagement. But the big sticking point is the border. The big sticking point is going to be how we handle the border and how we handle the influx of immigrants coming through, and how we continue to manage that hopefully in a better way. But that's the big elephant in the room, is how do you handle immigration, and how does it impact our relationships with our biggest, with Mexico. U.S. is the biggest trading partner, but it's also, Mexico's also a very diverse country. It also has lots of trading partners, and more so than any of the other countries in Latin America, is a much more diversified economy. So I think Mexico is going to be fine, but there's lots of places that have U.S. as their biggest trading partner that are going to have a real issue.
I was going to extend the border issue regarding migration. So most of the illegal migration isn't actually Mexicans, it's from other nation states. So, continue to develop a good relationship with Mexico will help us manage that as well on that other side prior to getting to the U.S. border. So I think a better, closer tie with the new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, and Trump would really help avoid further continuation of what we've been experiencing for a while.
If you put yourself in the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum's shoes, what are some things that you would recommend from day one that she thinks about with Trump?
Look, I think she's got a lot more issues that she's got to think about. She's got a massive federal deficit that they have to tame. And I think next week is the presentation to the ratings agencies, and so there's a real danger that that Mexico's rating could drop. It's the only investment grade one, that in Chile and Latin America, and so the challenge for her is really not so. Yes, there's things that have to come from Trump, but a lot of that's going to be driven by him with the tariffs and whether they're 10 or 20 or 30 or 100%. All that is very much an impact on the Mexican economy and the ability for that economy to pay its debts. And so that's a big challenge. Right now, inflation is a high rate in the in Mexico. And so they're talking about subsidizing oil again, like they did over the pandemic. But you can't really do that when your deficit is continuing to soar. So her big issues are inflation, deficit, crime. And so those have some bearing on what goes on with her interactions and engagement with Trump, but they mainly have to, she's got to really figure out internally how to manage her country going forward because the deficit is spiraling, and the forecast for the next couple of years is that's going to get higher because we're going to have a shrinking economy that'll grow less than 1.5% because of the tariffs that are happening from the U.S. side.
Jonathan?
I think Cato explained it very clearly, but I think probably with her situation, it's kind of really be clear with the Mexican folks about whether or not she's going to run her administration as a continuation as the last one, and whether or not there's going to provide more optimism in the future for further business development and expansion of the private sector.
One of the things that she did do right after her inauguration was that the ambassador to the U.S. Had a weekly breakfast with AMLO, the former president, and now she has moved that person over to her Secretary of State rather than meeting directly with her. And so they're doing some different things. She's got a very well-prepared cabinet. She's got a very well-prepared group of people that are around her, and so the hope is that there'll be more pragmatic policies rather than some of the protectionist policies that AMLO had delivered.
We've talked a lot about Mexico, but of course Latin America is huge. Let's talk a little bit about Brazil and some of the opportunities there.
I think that Brazil, look, I've been in Latin America for 30 plus years and working in Latin America for 30 years for BlackRock, Fidelity, Putnam and Dimensional Fund Advisors, and Brazil has always had great potential. Brazil is a fantastic capital markets. It's a fantastic market overall, but it's very closed and it's very hard to deliver there. When I was at BlackRock, we'd opened an office there, and there was probably 5 years where it was just a cash cow. We're just dumping money into it until it kind of hit the ground running. But Brazil, you have to be very local in Brazil, and that is always a challenge. There's lots of, it's very, like I said, very protectionist. There's lots of controls to be able to operate in Brazil in a way that you need to, and it takes time. Even with, like I said, BlackRock at the largest, financial firm in the world, it was really hard to do. And so Brazil is a great place to be. I'm a GP for a VC fund in Brazil that invests in blockchain companies. And the reality is that most of Brazil invests in Brazil, and they don't invest much out. And then it's hard for others to get into Brazil. It's like the one outlier in all these places. But if you look at Mexico and Brazil together, and you're able to kind of conquer those two, you're really going to have a really solid presence. But cracking Brazil is time, effort, money, and patience.
I was going to say, I haven't spent much time in Brazil. My focus has been with Mexico in the last 3 years. But what I do know is because of the barriers that Kato has mentioned, Brazil, or at least I know of one Brazilian company that has left or established an office within the United States to help try to ease the cash investments that way.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Brazil has too is that they're very innovative. I mean, so there are substantial private equity funds there. There's substantial private credit funds. The government itself has made a big push into crypto. There's a stable coin. There's a whole regulatory system that allows for the flow of crypto into and out of the economy. And so they've done a real good job of really upgrading their overall economic system and financial system. But it's for Brazilians, so that's the big issue. It's hard for others to crack it.
When you're dealing with governments in Latin America, what are the biggest challenges from a regulatory perspective?
They can change, and they can change their mind. The big deal with AMLO over the last 6 years, the sexenio, is that there were some nationalization projects that took place that because of the new treaty, Mexico, U.S. and Canada, there are no remediations for U.S. or private companies to go to fight against the government. And so I think that's going to be a big issue, and that was the big issue for folks thinking about Sheinbaum coming in, is that will she continue those types of policies where you just take over a company because you're the government and you want to, and you can, because there's no recourse under the new free trade agreement.
I would say basically just all the vanity projects that they keep on, kind of to Kato's point about just changing their minds. That's the biggest issue. In Chihuahua, where I spend most of my time, especially since Juarez is there, and that's a good entry point within the United States, the local governments have been more open to working with the small, medium businesses and the startup studios that I've been working with as well. But there's been a lot of vanity projects that kind of just get publicized and then just drops.
How do you cut through the fog when you're dealing with, let's say, a large family-owned business?
It's time and relationships. I mean, you have to get to know them, and they have to get to know you. This is still a business in an area of the world where trust has to be earned and shown over time. You don't show up with just my BlackRock card and I've got a good deal going on. You have to really earn that over time with these folks, and it takes local partners to kind of make it work really, really well. But like I said, there's plenty of opportunity, because whatever college or university you went to, there's someone in Mexico that went there as well too, and there's a ready-made kind of network for you there.
I would say that the same rules apply if you're doing business in like Asia or the Middle East. It's going to be slow to at this point. You have to earn their trust, and knowing some family members to bring you in, and then developing that is key. So Mexico is like no different, especially since these large conglomerates are mostly family controlled and they have their own vision, and so you have to enter from that tactic.
All right, I think we have time for a quick question from the audience. Yes.
There's been more volume around talk about Latin American governments shifting to the right. You've got Argentina, you got the U.S. election, there's some coming up in the world.
I mean, that's a trend around the world. I mean, it's basically, if you look at countries around the world, that's been the biggest push. That's been the biggest trend. And it's not so much kind of far right or far left. It's just extremes on both sides that are coming to power in lots of different areas. And it's not endemic to Latin America. It's everywhere. I mean, and so I think
Would
that's...
that be a positive for the way you see it?
Well, it depends on the country. And look, I think in some countries where you have, here's what I'll say. In Mexico, everybody knows what a Mexican is. Okay? In America, I'm American, you're American, we're very, very different. And I think you see that across the board here. The commonality is hard to figure out here now in America. In other places, yeah, they're far left, far right, but they're still Mexican, they're still Turkish, they're still German. It's a very monoculture, you know, in that sense. Here, in this great melting pot of America, everybody has their own truth. So it's a different challenge that we have to figure out how to find common ground with each other. It's a little easier in other countries because they're all the same.
All right, we'll leave it there. My thanks to the panelists here, and stay tuned for the final panel of the day.